I am Olivia Bennett, 38, and 5 minutes into my brother's wedding, he mocked my so-called tiny job in front of everyone, while my parents smiled to smooth it over, and the room waited to see if I would swallow it. If I speak, I risk turning a celebration into a scene. If I stay quiet, I confirm the story that has kept me small. Then the doors open, the air shifts, and a man whose presence organizes rooms looks past the groom and greets me with a respect my family has never used. In that instant, I have to decide how to hold my name, my work, and the peace of the night. When your worth is tested in public, what do you do in the very next breath? Stay with me, and I will show you the calmest way to take back your place without raising your voice. The chandeliers in the Waldorf Astoria threw soft light over silver tables and white roses, and the room hummed with the low music of money. Men in tailored tuxedos leaned over neat glasses of bourbon. Women in silk drifted like slow-moving colors, their perfumes mixing with the scent of lilies and candle wax. I kept to the edge of it all, palms flat against the cool linen of a cocktail table, my navy dress as quiet as I intended to be. I had chosen it for that purpose. Smooth fabric, clean lines, nothing that asked for notice. I wanted to pass through the evening like smoke. Servers glided past with flutes of champagne. I accepted one and let the bubbles sit against my lip before I took a sip. Across the ballroom, a photographer staged the wedding party near a towering wall of white peonies. Daniel stood taller than the rest, his smile wide, and practiced the kind of grin that said he believed every camera belonged to him. Jessica shimmered at his side in satin that caught the light like water. People touched Daniel's arm and told him how proud the family must be. Pride is a loud emotion. It carries across a room even when no words reach you. My mother found me before the second sip. Claire always knew where to look when she needed something polished. She smoothed a small wrinkle on my sleeve that only she could see and told me that I should mingle. "Everyone is asking about you," she said. Then she added what she always adds, that being busy does not make a person successful, that Daniel very nearly defines success. The youngest vice president in Sterling Industries history, she reminded me, and married so well. I said I was fine. I told her the work keeps me occupied. My mother pursed her lips in a way that suggested I should have chosen different words and drifted back toward a brighter circle of people who could reflect more favorable light. My father preferred volume to suggestion. Richard clapped an old friend on the back and announced that his son was the kind of leader a legacy company longs for. He mentioned the right schools and the right mentors, and the right boardroom instincts that Daniel had displayed since he was young. I finished the champagne and set the glass near a plate of buttered rolls, and decided I would not follow the arc of that story tonight. There are nights when silence is the strongest choice. Tonight would be one of them. The band moved into a standard that my grandmother loved, a tune she used to hum when she stirred sugar into her tea. My hand went automatically to the locket at my collarbone. It was small and warm against my skin, a circle of gold from another lifetime. Eleanor had pressed it into my palm when I was younger, and frightened and ready to start something that no one in our house thought I should start. "Believe in the work and in yourself," she said. "Not at the end when it is easy. At the beginning when no one sees it." I breathed in the memory and let it steady me. Guests brushed past with congratulations for the Bennetts. A woman in emerald satin asked if I was enjoying the party. I said that I was, and I meant it in the simplest sense. Enjoyment can be the calm knowledge that you will not be drawn into a familiar play. I watched the hotel staff adjust a line of chairs by the dance floor and thought of the years that had led to this room. Late nights, long flights, bad coffee. The stubborn belief that what I was building mattered. That belief did not need a spotlight, and certainly did not need this ballroom. Daniel's laughter cut through the music, bright and a little sharp. He had collected a small audience near the ice sculpture. My father guided a pair of sterling suppliers toward him, like he was presenting a trophy. When Daniel saw me, he lifted his chin. There was a spark in his eyes that used to mean we were about to race through sprinklers in the summer yard. It means something else now. He told the group that family keeps you grounded. He said that some of us carry the heavy load, while some of us find our way in smaller fields. People nod the way people nod when they intend to be kind and are not sure how. I decided then that I would not defend myself. Not here, not in this way. Defense would turn the moment into a contest, and contests at weddings end poorly for everyone. I placed my empty flute on a passing tray and folded my hands. The silk at my hip cooled under the air conditioning. I could feel my pulse slow. I imagined a line of shoreline far from here and let the waves pull my breath into rhythm. Claire returned with a fresh smile and told Richard that Daniel was about to say a few words before the first dance. Richard put an arm around her and thanked the guests nearest him for coming to celebrate a son any parent would be proud of. Pride again, warm and heavy. It pressed against my ribs. I let it pass through me without catching. Dignity lives in the space you keep to yourself when the room invites you to step onto a smaller stage. Distant clinking asked for attention. The band paused. The chandeliers hummed. Jessica tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and rested her hand on Daniel's arm. He lifted his glass, and the crowd turned. I moved a half step back to let a server through and touched the locket once more to remind my mouth to stay closed. The night had a long way to travel. I would not rush it. Daniel raised his glass and thanked everyone for coming, his voice warm enough to melt butter. He called the night a celebration of love and family, and the crowd answered with polite laughter. He talked about hard work and destiny and how the right people recognize talent when they see it. His smile widened as if he had rehearsed that line in the mirror. Then he glanced toward me and let the silence hang for a heartbeat. He said that every family has someone who chooses a smaller path, a tiny lane where the stakes are low and the hours are comfortable. He said we all should applaud courage in any form, even when it looks like a modest consulting gig that pays the bills. The words were coated with charm, but the bite was clear. A few guests snickered. One of Daniel's colleagues lifted his eyebrows in a half smile that said he understood the game. Jessica leaned into Daniel's shoulder and offered a sweet nod, as if to forgive the less fortunate among us. Her satin dress caught the light and tossed it right back into my eyes. I felt the locket against my skin and kept my expression still. The band eased into a soft riff to cover the awkward air. My father clapped first loud and quick, and others followed out of habit. My mother gave me a look that said I should not take anything personally on a night like this. She tilted her chin toward the dance floor as if pointing at the safer part of the room. A man near me muttered that Daniel had a way with the crowd. Another guest whispered that families can be complicated. I took a slow breath and let it out evenly. The trick is to let the cruelty pass through you like wind through a curtain not catching on any nail. Daniel did not stop there. He told a brief story about his early years at Sterling, how he started with nothing but grit and a borrowed suit. He talked about mentors and long nights and how he had pulled himself up by refusing to settle. Jessica added that drive runs in the family and that even his sister keeps busy with her little firm. She smiled in my direction with an expression that managed to be kind and condescending at once. The phrase landed as if it had been waiting in his pocket. Poor sis, still working at that tiny firm. The shape of the words was clear even across the space between us. People turned to see how I would take it. A woman with pearl earrings bit her lip. A younger cousin stared at the floor. I pressed my palms together and felt the bones align. Memory opened like a drawer. The apartment in 2012. The cheap lamp on the second-hand desk, the spreadsheet where I tracked every dollar. 50,000 saved one patient line at a time. Then the request was not a request. Family needs, they said. Daniel's future, they said. It will come back to you. The check had cleared like clean water, and then the years rolled forward. Daniel finished the MBA in 2014. The repayment never arrived. Holidays came with gifts and photos and compliments for Daniel's promotions. My name was spoken as a footnote, the practical daughter, the one who gets by. I let that drawer close. This was not the room for history lessons, not yet. The servers began to move again, trays glinting like small moons. A waiter offered champagne to me and to a woman beside me with a gold shawl. She declined and whispered that brothers can be careless with their words. I thanked her and lifted my glass, but did not drink. Daniel's circle tightened around him. He told the suppliers from Ohio that the next quarter would be strong. He promised a new efficiency plan and nodded as they praised his leadership. My father guided more guests to the cluster, eager to add witnesses to the story of a son on the rise. My mother adjusted Jessica's veil and called her the jewel of the family. Claire liked to arrange people as if they were pieces on a table setting. One of Daniel's friends, a broad-shouldered man with slicked hair, asked me what kind of projects I took on at my consulting place. His tone was casual, but he leaned in for a better view of my face. I answered that I kept a low profile and that my clients valued discretion. He laughed and said discretion is a good word for small. I said nothing. Silence is a good word for dignity. Jessica drifted over with two bridesmaids trailing tufts of tulle. She told me she admired my independence and that not everyone needs a big title to feel fulfilled. She said it as a kindness, I think. Or perhaps as a ribbon to tie around a box that did not contain much. I thanked her and complimented her gown. The satin was heavy and expensive, and it made a soft sound when she moved like wind touching a sail. A toast started at the far end of the ballroom and rolled toward us in overlapping waves. Glasses lifted again. The band found another standard. Daniel leaned close to a cluster of guests and repeated the line about some of us choosing smaller fields. The same laugh, the same satisfied tilt of his head. I watched the way people relaxed when a person with authority invited them to laugh at someone else. It is an old trick. It works because it lets fear breathe. Distantly, I noticed Aunt Margaret near the doorway watching me with steady eyes. She did not come over, did not make a scene, only gave me the kind of look that lets a person know they have been seen. I let my shoulders drop a fraction. The locket warmed beneath my palm. I turned from the cluster and walked to the edge of the dance floor. The parquet reflected the chandeliers in small broken squares. A server paused to ask if I needed anything. I asked for still water and took the glass when it came. Cool weight, clear mind. The room kept its glittering rhythm. The night kept moving in the direction it wanted to go. I stayed quiet and let it go. The band shifted into something slow and bright, and the ballroom breathed with it. I lifted the glass of water and let the cool slide across my palms, while the dance floor opened for a few eager couples. At the bar, my father had found a fresh cluster of admirers. His laugh rose above the music, followed by familiar phrases about discipline and promise, and the kind of leadership that could not be taught. He said Daniel had always been a captain in the making. He said executives recognized him on sight. The men around him nodded like a row of metronomes, keeping time with his pride. Claire drifted toward me wearing her company face. She adjusted a cuff on my sleeve that did not need adjusting and said it would be best if the evening stayed simple. She reminded me that weddings ask for grace. She said a gracious sister does not invite attention. She asked that I avoid bringing anything up that might confuse guests or take the spotlight off the couple. I told her I was here to celebrate and that I would be on my way at a reasonable hour. She studied my expression for a long moment, as if the wrong word might be hiding in a corner of my mouth. Then she patted my arm and went to rearrange flowers that were already arranged. I stepped nearer to a tall arrangement of gardenias and let the scent push back the smell of champagne. Aunt Margaret appeared like a steady harbor, small smile, clear eyes. She told me my navy dress suited me and asked if the shoes were comfortable. I said they were, which was partly true. She did not ask about work. She never asked unless I opened the door. That silence felt like permission to be a person first and a job second. We stood together and watched a ring bearer practice his steps at the edge of the room. After a moment, she squeezed my hand and moved on, leaving a small calm behind her. Daniel began his tour again. Jessica on his arm. Bridesmaids floating in a wake of tulle. He shook hands, clasped shoulders, told the right anecdotes to the right people. When he reached my corner, he greeted Aunt Margaret with an easy memory from summers at the lake. Then his attention found me. He said the night was lining up in all the right ways. He said key guests were arriving by the minute. He mentioned that James Harrison was expected to stop in to offer congratulations on the way to a board dinner. He said the CEO almost never came to employee events and that exceptions meant something. I watched how he savored that word. Jessica added in a soft voice that Daniel had prepared remarks for a small circle when the moment presented itself. She said it would be special to have family standing nearby so the CEO could see the support that surrounded Daniel. She rested her hand lightly on my forearm and smiled the way brides are taught to smile in photographs. I told her I would be close to the dance floor. I said I would clap at the right time. Her shoulders loosened as if I had signed a peace agreement. Richard slid in with perfect timing and placed his hand on Daniel's shoulder like it was a medal. He told two vendors from the Midwest that Harrison valued initiative above all and that Daniel embodied it. He listed recent projects and savings targets with the satisfaction of a man reading a scorecard. The vendors kept glancing toward the entrance as if a curtain might rise at any moment. Claire hovered behind them and reminded me to keep my smile warm when introductions happened. She said sometimes candid remarks could be misread, and she trusted me to keep things smooth. I let a pleasant expression settle on my face and said I was looking forward to the cake. A server offered crab cakes, and I took one mostly to have something to do with my hands. The olive tapenade tasted sharp and clean. Daniel checked his watch, and then the doorway. He told a senior manager that Harrison had flagged his report with a handwritten note last quarter, and that initiative like that tends to get noticed. He said he planned to thank him for the opportunity and to mention a proposal that would drive margins on a sluggish line. The manager said that sounded strategic, and that momentum is everything. Jessica watched him with open admiration. Her faith took up space. I turned my glass in a slow circle on the linen. The rim left a faint ring that faded as quickly as it formed. The urge to correct their narrative pressed and then receded. There are nights when truth does not need you to carry it. It moves on its own like tide water under a thin moon. I thought of the hours that had stacked into years, of early flights and late returns, of what it costs to keep a promise to yourself when no one is watching. Some debts go unrecorded, and some balances settle on their own schedules. Across the room, Aunt Margaret stood near the dessert table cutting a small square of lemon cake. She caught my eye and gave a tiny nod that felt like a blessing. A flower girl twirled until her skirt bellied out and then giggled into her hands. The band brightened the tempo. I breathed with the music and felt my shoulders drop. Daniel and his friends shifted their positions to create a line of sight to the entrance. He stood half a step taller and smoothed his tie. He told the group that when leaders walk into a room, they notice who is ready. He said tonight would show that he was ready. My father positioned himself at an angle that would allow him to guide Harrison directly to his son. My mother watched the path they had mapped out and smiled in advance at the picture she hoped to see. I lifted the water and finished it. The glass made a soft sound when I set it down. Then I let a small private smile rise and fade. Some truths prefer their own entrance. They do not need an escort or a speech. They arrive when they are ready, and they do not ask permission. A current moved through the doorway the way a tide slips into a quiet bay. Conversations thinned, then tilted toward the entrance as if the room itself leaned. The maitre d' adjusted a rope line by instinct. Two hotel staff widened the aisle without being told. I saw the silver first, a clean sweep above a calm face, and then the posture that says a man has spent years entering rooms where people expect him. James Harrison, at 58, carried that calm like a tailored jacket. He paused at the threshold just long enough to read the space. It was the look of someone who sees the whole chessboard in a breath. Where the exits are, where the clusters gather, which faces are watching and which are pretending not to. His gaze touched my parents, slid across a small knot of sterling managers and kept moving. The band softened another shade. A woman near me set her glass down without quite finding the table. Daniel saw him next. His back straightened and his hand found Jessica's wrist in a guiding gesture. She tipped her chin and followed as he stepped toward the open lane that had been saved for important arrivals. Richard drifted into the same path, ready to intercept and connect son to CEO in one smooth motion. Claire rehearsed a smile and a sentence in the space behind her teeth. I watched all of it with the stillness I had been practicing since the first toast. Harrison altered the course a few degrees. It was small and entirely decisive. He did not thread himself into the waiting introduction. He did not lift a hand for a public shake across a crowd. He came forward at the same steady pace past Daniel's cluster, past a stack of champagne coupes, past the cake table, where a pastry chef pretended not to stare. His attention came to rest where he meant it to, on me. He stopped within an easy distance and inclined his head, respect without performance. His voice held the even warmth of a seasoned professional in a formal room. He greeted me with a quiet ma'am and said he had not known I would be there. No commentary on business, no slips into shop talk. Only the kind of greeting one offers a person one recognizes and respects. I let my shoulders stay low. I felt the locket warm against my skin, a small sun at my collarbone. I answered with something simple about the beauty of the evening and how lovely the couple looked. He agreed in the same measured way. We were careful because care is what you bring to a public space when the ears around you are not yours. He offered his hand. I placed mine in his. The shake was brief and precise, the kind that marks time and moves on. Around us a delicate hush fell, as if someone had lowered a glass dome over the ballroom. Even the chandeliers seemed to hum at a lower note. The circle of onlookers tightened by habit. People lean closer when a narrative shifts, and they are not sure yet what it means for them. From the edge of my vision, I saw Daniel stop mid-stride. 1 foot forward, 1 foot back, held by the elastic of a plan that had snapped. His features arranged themselves into a version of composure. Jessica steadied her bouquet and kept her smile in place, but her eyes widened the smallest fraction. My mother's bright expression held a shade too bright now, while my father recalculated angles the way he always did when the facts had wandered from the script. A young server hovered with a tray of sparkling water and then remembered to breathe. He offered it. Harrison accepted a glass with a quiet thank you. The boy bobbed his head and moved away on soft shoes. The lilies along the aisle sent a cool breath through the moment, as if the flowers exhaled for all of us. Daniel found his voice before he found a path back into the center. He told the nearest guest that this was an honor for the family. He said he had looked forward to thanking the CEO personally for attending. The phrasing fit a wedding, but the energy around it did not reassemble the room. Harrison acknowledged him with the same courteous nod he had given the maitre d'. Then his attention settled where it had been. Claire eased closer to Jessica and adjusted an imaginary thread near the bodice of the gown. It was her way of touching the scene without having to address it. Richard gave the vendors a smile that belonged to a past minute when momentum ran in a different direction. They tried on the expression and held it waiting to see where it would land. I stood in the small circle of space that opens when the air changes and people step back a breath. I felt no rush, only the clean edge of clarity. I said something polite about the music and the hotel. Harrison returned a line about the elegance of the evening and the graciousness of the hosts. The words were furniture. They were there to keep the room upright. The band held a note just long enough to sound like a question. Someone across the ballroom laughed too loudly, and then swallowed the sound. My pulse was even. My mouth was calm. The locket pressed a steady point against my skin, as if reminding me to keep what was mine tucked in place until I chose to move it. Harrison set his water on a passing tray and gave me the small professional smile I knew from other rooms and other hours. The half-circle leaned without moving. In that quiet, I understood that whatever came next would arrive on the back of a single sentence. I let the moment bloom to its full shape and did not hurry it. I stood without hurry and met Harrison's steady gaze. All the noise of the ballroom gathered behind my ribs where it could not spill. His hand was there, and I took it a clean shake, the brief meeting of people who know how to carry themselves in public. The room drew a breath. I let mine out and spoke in a voice that belonged to me. Why not I own the company? It was not loud. It did not need to be. The words settled like a pebble into still water, and then the ring started. Nearest faces opened in surprise, and then closed again as if to hold it. Farther out, guests tipped toward one another, and the quiet hiss of whispers began. A woman with a jeweled clutch pressed it to her chest. A man adjusted his bow tie twice and then left it crooked. Somewhere near the cake, a small spoon tapped a saucer and made a brittle sound before it went still. Harrison's mouth held a respectful line. He told me it was good to see me and offered congratulations on recent milestones. He did not name them. He kept his words within the careful frame that a public room requires. I nodded once and thanked him. We both left the rest where it belonged, off the floor behind doors on calendars. Even careful words can carry truth farther than anyone expects if the room is ready to hear it. A ripple moved outward and came back again. Phones appeared and angled like small periscopes. A guest near the bar lifted her device and then lowered it halfway, caught between manners and curiosity. Another guest did not hesitate. His thumb went to record, and the tiny red light made a pinprick star. A pair of bridesmaids stood on tiptoe, their tools shifting like smoke. From the edge of my vision, I saw my brother's color drain. Daniel had not come forward another step. He looked as if someone had reached into the air and taken hold of his balance. His eyes went to Harrison, then to me, then to the arc of guests who had noticed what had passed between us and were trying to make it mean something they could repeat later. Jessica's hand slipped against the stem of her glass. It fell and struck the parquet. The crack of crystal on wood cracked the attention in the room. Shards leapt, then stilled. The sound hung for a long beat, and then sank to the floor with the pieces. The band faltered, and then found its place again, softer now, as if a thin blanket had been thrown over the drums. A server knelt with a towel and began to gather the glass. Jessica stared at the glittering mess, and then at my face, as if I had willed gravity to act. She pulled her hand back and clasped her bouquet so tightly the ribbon creased. Harrison spoke a few polite words to the cluster, something neutral and gracious. He nodded to my parents with the warmth people use in rooms where everyone has done their best outfits and their best behavior. My mother's smile broke at one corner, and then she repaired it the way a hostess repairs a place card. My father arranged his features into a shape that suggested he had expected this, though his eyes told a different story. The vendors beside him held their breath with the efficiency of men who know how to wait out a tense minute in a conference room. The low tide of whispers grew. That line again carried from table to table. She owns the company. The words changed shape in each mouth. Own runs. The company became firm, became an outfit, became something worth saying out loud. A woman in emerald satin whispered to her partner, and he shook his head slowly as if recalculating a map. A cousin slid his phone under the tablecloth to type a message. The first reply buzzed a second later and lit his lap with approval. I stood still and let the room adjust its weight. I did not add to the story. It did not need me for a moment. It needed to stand up on its own legs and learn to walk through the crowd. The locket at my collarbone was warm. My hands were steady. I watched Harrison accept sparkling water from the young server and thank him by name after glancing at his badge. Professional grace is the same in every room. You learn it, or the rooms keep you at their edges. Daniel tried on a smile that did not live on his face. He told a cluster of managers that it was remarkable to see leadership take time for family celebrations. He attempted a light comment about small worlds and good timing. The words floated and did not land. Jessica pressed 2 fingers to her temple and breathed through her nose. Claire moved toward her and fussed with an imaginary thread at her hem. Richard adjusted his cufflinks, then his tie, then his cufflinks again. The maitre d' directed the server with the towel, and the last of the glass disappeared. A staff member placed a small sign beside the spill that read, "Wet floor," and then thought better of it and carried the sign away. The chandeliers went on shining. The roses went on opening. The city outside kept its own pace. I turned slightly to give Harrison a clear path to circulate. He thanked me for the brief hello with that small professional smile. I returned it and stood where I was while he moved to greet the hosts. The half-circle expanded again, then folded inward as people chose new positions from which to watch the night. The hum of voice returned lower now, braided with the question that follows a reveal. I kept my calm and let the question do its work. Richard moved first with the reflex of a man who refuses to let air sit still. He stepped toward the nearest cluster of guests and began to talk in the bright tone he saves for Rotarians and holiday cocktails. He said what a joy it was to see leaders show up for their people. He said families are full of surprises and that the Bennetts have always prized humility. He laughed at his own line and patted a vendor on the shoulder, as if the night were only a little off balance and he could steady it with a single hand. Claire's fingers shook against the stem of her champagne flute. She tried to anchor herself by arranging the beads on her clutch into a perfect pattern. When she looked up, the smile stayed, but the corners trembled the way a thread trembles just before it snaps. She told a bridesmaid that nerves are natural on a big night, and that everyone should remember the purpose of an evening like this. Her voice was almost steady. Almost. I kept my place and let the room do what rooms do when a simple sentence has shifted the floorboards. The murmurs rolled and returned like a tide finding a new shoreline. From table to table, I could hear versions of my words changing shape. Own became led. The company became a firm or group. It hardly mattered. The essence was enough to move the air. Inside my quiet, a clean ledger unfolded. Aurora Capital Holdings had started in a cramped space in 2011 with second-hand desks and a paper calendar that bled ink. By 2022, our advisory work and management fees together had climbed to $4.5 billion. Assets under management sat in the high 30s by then, a number that felt less like triumph and more like responsibility every time I signed another letter to investors. Sterling had once been valued near $2.8 billion. By 2023, it carried roughly $800 million in debt and a reputation that needed careful hands. Numbers are not everything, but they tell a plain story when people do not. Richard tried a second pass. He told a small circle that Daniel had always impressed his superiors and that tonight would be remembered for love, not for gossip. He aimed for authority and offered an apology instead. The circle loosened, then drifted away in polite pieces. A man from logistics muttered that the city was smaller than he thought. A woman from a supplier stared into her glass as if it could explain what she had just seen. Daniel stood where the pathway had opened for him and then closed. Color had not returned to his face. He smoothed his jacket with a hand that missed its target, then pressed his palm flat against the linen of a chairback as if he needed the feel of something that would not move. Jessica kept her smile, but it flickered. She bent to dab at the spot where her glass had fallen and stopped when a staff member knelt with a towel. Claire fluttered toward her, all concern and efficient touch, but her eyes kept jumping back to me, measuring the risk in every second I remained in view. The whisper grew teeth. Someone near the bar repeated the line and added a guess at what Aurora might mean for Sterling. Someone else corrected a detail and got another wrong. That is the nature of rooms. They decide first and verify later. I watched a young cousin glance down at his phone and then glance up at me with a face that did not know whether to grin or apologize. I spared him the work and looked away. Richard recognized that the pitch of the room was sliding from awkward to unmanageable. He set his glass down with care and walked straight to me. His smile was built for photographs and negotiations, and it was meant to soften whatever came next. He suggested in a softened voice that the family take a moment privately, just a brief step into a side room to collect ourselves and make sure the night stayed beautiful for everyone. He used words like grace and unity, and asked if I would help him keep the evening on its feet. I considered the line he was trying to walk. Historically, it had been my job to make his lines hold. Tonight, I was not interested in propping them up. Still, there are choices that make sense not because a person owes a debt, but because the staff do not deserve to pick glass out of a problem they did not create. I nodded once. Claire exhaled as if a thread had been tied. Jessica gathered her bouquet and looked everywhere but at Daniel. He tried on a smile again and let it fall. We moved together in a small procession that pretended not to be one. Richard led Claire at his elbow, Daniel and Jessica a pace behind. Aunt Margaret materialized long enough to meet my eyes and tilt her head toward the side corridor. Her look said what her mouth did not need to say. Take the quiet when it is offered. Use it well. The maitre d' opened a narrow door near the end of the ballroom where the lighting was softer and the music faded to a murmur. Beyond it waited a small sitting room, dressed in cream and gold, a place meant for tired bridesmaids and small crises with zippers. Richard thanked the staff with a voice that sounded like his good suit. Then he stood aside and extended a hand as if ushering guests into a chapel. I stepped past him and felt the hush of thick carpet take the edge off my heels. The door closed with the gentlest click. The noise of the ballroom dropped to a distant hum like the city outside when you shut a window. My mother stood very straight, fingers still around the glass, and for a moment no one said anything at all. It was the cleanest silence of the night, and it held long enough for everyone to understand that talk would not be the same after this. The small sitting room smelled of powder and gardenias, and the hush felt like folded velvet. Richard cleared his throat first and said that we should all take a breath and keep our words measured. He added that important evenings can turn on a careless sentence and that the family needed to present one picture. Claire stood very straight and told me that I had chosen the worst possible moment to be difficult. She called it the wrong time, the wrong place, and asked why I could not show support without reminding people of myself. I let her finish. The carpet softened the weight in my legs. When I spoke, I kept my voice even. I said that for years I had been told to be small, to be realistic, to let the family narrative stand even when it was built on my back. I said that the money I saved in 2012, $50,000 line by line, had been taken for Daniel's MBA and never returned. I said that tonight I had not announced anything. The truth had walked in on its own feet and introduced itself in a room where everyone was already dressed to listen. Daniel moved closer until I could see the small pulse in his throat. He said in a low push of words that I had no right to humiliate him on his wedding day. He said that I always twist things to make myself look better and that I had just hijacked years of his work. I held up a hand without touching him and told him to take a step back. I said that he needed to keep a respectful distance and that raising his voice would not change facts that had been standing in daylight long before the first song played. Jessica looked from his face to mine and then to Claire, as if searching for a cue that never came. Her voice wobbled and then steadied. She asked Daniel why he had never told her who I was outside of this room. She asked how a sister could have built what I built, and her husband could have said nothing beyond a line about a small consulting gig. Daniel told her that he had wanted our night to be simple. He said that not every detail needs to be shared, and that he had meant to explain it later. Jessica's eyes went cold in a way I had not seen on her face before. She said that later sounded like a word used to hide. Richard tried to gather the conversation and point it somewhere safe. He said that families choose peace when they can. He said the Bennetts should not let a misunderstanding ride roughshod over a celebration. Claire took a step toward me and asked me again to be gracious. She said that the best thing I could do was to keep quiet and let Daniel have his moment. I told them I had kept quiet through many moments that were paid for with my time and my savings. I said that grace is not a muzzle, and that what happened in the ballroom was not my announcement. A man greeted a professional in a polite room. Other people read it as a headline. Daniel's jaw worked. He asked why I had to stand where Harrison could see me. I told him that Harrison would have seen me anywhere in that room. I said that even if I had been in the coat check, the space would have bent until we met. I kept my hands still at my sides and let my breath come easy. The locket at my collarbone felt warm like a reminder to keep to the simple line of the truth. Jessica turned to Daniel and said that marriage asks for honesty and that she needed to understand what other important pieces he had put aside. Claire told her that the stress of a big night can shake anyone. Richard cut across them and said we were getting lost in the weeds and that business did not belong in a wedding suite. I agreed with that last part. I said that we would not discuss any business in this room. I said that anything professional would go through proper channels through calendars and counsel and non-disclosure where required. I said that we would use the same discipline we use in every other space. Daniel said that he could not afford for rumors to start. I told him that rumors had already started years ago the moment he chose to believe the smallest version of me, because it made his own version easier to hold. I said that none of this would have been difficult if respect had been in the room when I asked for it as a younger woman. Claire said that I was being dramatic. Richard lifted a hand to calm her and asked me quietly what I expected from them right now. I told him that I expected basic respect. I said I expected Daniel to stop speaking to me like a subordinate and to keep his distance when he's angry. I expected my mother to stop calling my work a hobby. And I expected that we would return to the ballroom and let the night move on without further performance. No one answered for a beat. The quiet came back in a soft wave. Jessica wrapped her bouquet ribbon once around her finger and let it go. Daniel took a half step back as if the floor had finally given him instruction. Claire stared at the glass in her hand like it might offer a better script. Richard let out a breath he had been holding and nodded once. He said that we would rejoin the party, that we would smile for the toasts, and that we would act as if we had been raised to do the right thing in public. I stood still and weighed that. Then I said that I could do that. I added that if anyone wanted to talk about respect or repairs or repayment, we could schedule those conversations next week during daylight in a room where people keep notes. I reached for the door and felt the cool metal under my palm. On the other side, the music rose and fell like the ocean against a seawall. I opened the door and the sound widened. For a heartbeat, we all stood in the threshold between the quiet we had made and the night that waited to keep going. We stepped back into the ballroom and the sound folded over us like warm surf. The half circle had dissolved, but the energy had shifted. Phones were out in pockets and clutched in discreet hands. I could tell by the bent heads and quick little taps that the clip of the greeting had already found its way into group chats. A bridesmaid near the cake laughed once too loudly, then silenced her screen as if the volume were shameful. At a table by the windows, a cousin showed something to his date, and she covered her mouth not in horror, but in the recognition that a private moment was leaving the room. The staff had cleared the broken crystal. The parquet shone as if nothing had fallen at all. Music floated again, thinner now, a polite veil over curiosity. I felt the old rhythm in my chest and let it settle me. Years of practice teach a person how to be watched without offering more than they intend to give. A server passed with coffee and I took a cup for the wait. The first sip tasted like chocolate and smoke. The phone in my clutch vibrated in a quick rhythm that meant more than wine. One person at once. I did not look. Another buzz arrived, then another, the way bees arrive when a branch blooms all at once. At the head of the room, a small line formed near the bride and groom, but the line held a careful distance. People wanted to be kind. They also wanted to be witnesses. Aunt Margaret slipped to my side and laced her fingers around mine for a moment. Her palm was warm and steady. She said softly without asking for an answer that my grandmother would be proud. I saw Eleanor in the way the candlelight pooled in the gold rim of a plate. I allowed the thought to rest like a small stone in my pocket. Margaret did not linger. She knows the difference between support and a spotlight. Richard tried again to restore the posture of celebration. He guided two older guests toward the dessert table and made admiring sounds about the chocolate fountain. Claire hovered near Jessica and smoothed the same inch of satin 3 times. At some point, Jessica excused herself. A bridesmaid went with her to the corridor where the powder room sits like a sanctuary. Daniel watched her go and then looked at me as if I were the one with a map. I did not return the look. The buzz in the room had changed shape. It was no longer a pure question. It had turned into a story that people felt they could tell without getting the details right. I heard the word owns, and then firm, and then leadership woven with guesses and half-remembered phrases. A local blogger, who must have been a guest of a guest, typed quickly with her thumbs. A man from a supplier told a tablemate that New York always feels vast until it feels like a village. I moved toward a quieter edge near a bank of palms. That is where Rachel Green found me. She came alone, holding her clutch close to her ribs, careful to approach from the front where I could see her. She introduced herself as if I might not remember, then admitted that, of course I did. We had grown up in the same hallways, eaten the same cafeteria food, and inhaled the same chalk dust. She said she had been unkind when we were younger and that she had treated my ambition like a flaw. She said she was sorry. The apology was simple and well-formed. I let it land where it belonged. I told her I appreciated the words. I did not pick up the thread of conversation any more than that. Some apologies are not doors. They are stones placed gently on graves that no longer need standing over. Rachel nodded as if she understood the limits of this exchange. She asked if I needed anything, then shook her head at herself and said of course I did not. She wished me well and walked back into the crowd with a posture that looked newly thoughtful. Near the dance floor, a small group watched the clip again on a phone held low between a pair of elbows. The video was grainy and the sound was mostly room noise, but the shape of it carried. A man's respectful greeting, a woman standing still. No more than that, and somehow enough. Someone whispered that the clip had been posted to a local news site that loves weddings and gossip and the unexpected overlap of the two. Another person said it was on an industry forum with a caption that asked if any room is ever truly private now. Jessica returned without the bridesmaid. Her makeup was perfect, but the skin around her eyes had lost color. She took Daniel's arm and spoke to him with a calm face that did not match her knuckles. He nodded too often. She turned away and walked toward her parents, then past them. After a few steps, she changed course and left the ballroom entirely. A door eased shut behind her. The gap she left did not close right away. Even the music seemed to hesitate. I felt the locket at my throat warm from my skin. For a breath I could hear nothing but the faint thrum of the band and the softer hum of 100 conversations adjusting to a new shape of evening. The clip would keep moving through phones and then settle into memory. The guests would take it home and tell it again around kitchen islands and office coffee machines. They would say that a sentence had tilted a room. They would say that the bride looked beautiful and tired and that the groom had misjudged the distance between who he thought he was and what everyone had just seen. Aunt Margaret returned with a small plate and asked if I wanted fruit. I took a strawberry so she would not carry a full plate for nothing. We stood together in the shadow of the palms and ate like women who have learned to conserve their energy. The night held balanced on the quiet between songs. Somewhere beyond the doors, the city kept breathing unbothered by the way one ballroom had changed its mind. Harrison rejoined the flow of guests long enough to greet the hosts, then angled back toward me with a polite smile that belonged to a well-run event. He asked my parents if he could borrow me for a moment. Richard nodded with careful graciousness. Claire adjusted her clutch and said we would all meet back by the cake. Daniel watched without a word as if sound might tilt the room again. We walked toward the corridor that leads to the restrooms and a quiet bank of elevators. The door closed behind us on a dimmer light, and the muffled thump of the band. The hotel smell changed to waxed stone and a hint of lemon cleaner. A framed print of the skyline hung over a bench where a child's jacket had been forgotten. We stood where the sconce light fell softly and created no shadows that could be mistaken for drama. Harrison kept his hands easy at his sides. He said he appreciated the courtesy of a minute, and that events are best left to be events. He said he would like to propose a short meeting at Aurora headquarters in the morning. He suggested 9 early enough to set the day without stealing it. I told him that it worked, and that my assistant would be there. He said his chief of staff would coordinate arrival and identification with the front desk. He added that his outside counsel would send a non-disclosure for signature tonight, and that a starter packet would follow through a secure portal. He did not name any contents. He did not touch anything that did not belong in a hallway outside a wedding. I told him we would review the logistics and return a signed copy before morning. I mentioned that our legal lead would manage document flow and confirm the virtual data room link. He nodded once. He said that good processes keep rooms like the one behind us calm. his mouth tilted in a way that suggested he knew how rare that can be. I told him we would keep to the process. We let a small silence pass, the kind that confirms both sides have said exactly enough. He thanked me again for the courtesy of a minute and said he would head back to congratulate the couple once more before leaving. We started back toward the ballroom. The thick carpet damped our steps. At the corner, we paused to let a bellman guide a luggage cart past. There was a rhythm to the hotel even on a night like this. Open, close, reveal, restore. The door swung, and the ballroom's breath met us. I stepped in and saw Aunt Margaret by the palms, watchful and gentle. Claire stood near Jessica's mother hands, folded like folded napkins. Richard had reclaimed a vendor and was pointing out the dessert table as if it were a new product line. I felt my phone hum in the clutch. The pattern told me Emma had written. I did not read it yet. Not in this light, not in the middle of so many eyes. I found a slice of quiet near a draped pillar and took the phone out just enough to shade the screen with my palm. Emma had sent a short note that she was on standby and would clear my morning. Beneath it, an email notification marched in from a familiar address. For a moment, I only looked at the sender. David Carter. I let the name sit like a clear bead on a line. He was not the kind of lawyer who wastes words. He used them like he used time with precision that often felt kind. The subject line read, Meeting confirmation, Aurora and Sterling. The body preview showed a list of attachments and a sentence about the secure link arriving under separate cover. He would have included signature fields where they belonged, not crammed into a body where someone might tap the wrong square. I set the phone down long enough to remember a different winter 2023, a flight back from Chicago with sleet pinning the plane to the runway. I had read a set of earnings and found the seams that did not match. The numbers inside Sterling's public face had not sung in the same key. A whisper from a fund manager had followed a month later, something about attention from people who do not send flowers. You learn to hear the pitch of a situation before anyone names it. You also learn to keep that hearing to yourself until there is a table and chairs and minutes and a gate on every document. The band moved into an old standard and the photographer repositioned the wedding party for another frame. I watched the way people tried to return to the original script. They mostly succeeded. Weddings are good at pretending. I stood in my small patch of space and let my breath measure the distance between what a room believes and what a file will prove. The edge between those two things is where discipline lives. Harrison returned to the couple and shook hands with the parents on both sides. He kept it brief. He left the ballroom without ceremony, the way careful men leave when there is no more to be done in the open. A guest by the bar put away his phone as if a bell had rung. Someone laughed too brightly and then softened it with a hand to the arm of a friend. I lifted the phone again and opened David's message. The text laid out the plan like a straight path. 9 o'clock at Aurora Capital Headquarters, Conference Room 12, signed non-disclosure requested by 8 initial materials to be accessed through the secure portal login to follow in a separate message. There was a line that said his team would be available by phone all night if needed. The attachments waited neatly stacked in the little icons. I let the screen dim and slipped back into the clutch. The night still belonged to the bride and groom, and the work could sit for the length of a song. A waltz settled over the room, and guests turned toward the dance floor. Claire touched my elbow with a soft tap that meant follow. Richard stood a few paces away with the attentive look he saved for negotiations and family pictures. He suggested in a low voice that we step aside for a moment. We crossed the edge of the ballroom, and the maitre d' opened the same small door to the sitting room. The carpet held our footsteps, and the door closed behind us with a hush. Claire faced me with her hands folded at her waist. She said the family needed my help to keep the evening intact. She said Daniel had earned his place at Sterling and asked that I do whatever is necessary to protect the position he deserves. Her smile was careful, and the corners trembled anyway. Richard added that a word from me would go a long way. He said a family should manage things within its own walls, and that there was no need for anyone outside this room to sense trouble. I kept my voice even. I told them that work would not be managed as a family favor. Aurora does not run on favors, and it does not reward connections. If a transaction closes and Sterling comes under our oversight, Daniel will be evaluated the same way every manager is evaluated. He will receive a performance improvement plan for 90 days if the role requires it, or a probationary period under new leadership. There will be measurable goals and clear feedback, and there will be no special treatment. If he meets the standard, he stays. If he does not, there will be an appropriate exit. Richard shifted his weight and lowered his tone. He suggested that standards can be interpreted with understanding when a person has a long history with a company. He asked whether I would consider the optics of a public change at his level, and whether a slower timeline could be arranged. He looked at me the way a man looks at a door he hopes will open with a lighter touch. I answered that optics are never the reason to keep or remove a person. Results are the reason. Culture is the reason. Risk is the reason. I said we will not move a date because a room feels delicate. I reminded him that the company is made of people who are not in this conversation, and they deserve the same fairness Daniel will get. Claire said she understood the need for process, but asked again for assurance. I gave her the only assurance that fits. Daniel will be treated fairly and professionally, nothing more and nothing less. Daniel entered a moment later, as if drawn to the gravity in the air. Jessica lingered at the threshold and then remained in the corridor close enough to hear the tone of our voices and far enough to avoid being pressed into a side. Richard repeated the request in a threadbare variation. He spoke of family and legacy and the need to avoid drama. Claire added that a mother cannot help but worry. I told them both that worry does not change the plan. My family will not step into my work, and I will not step into theirs. Those are the lines. Daniel asked, what would happen to his current team if a change came? I told him teams are evaluated as teams and also as individuals. No one is punished for another person's pride. He looked at the floor and then at his hands and then at me. He said he had built that department from the ground up. I kept my face still and let the claim pass without a catch. Richard tried a softer angle. He said perhaps a letter could be placed in a file that would guide the outcome. He said perhaps there could be a quiet understanding about the long view. I told him there will be a file and it will contain performance records, not family letters. I said there will be a long view and it will focus on the health of the company, not the comfort of one household. Claire asked if I could at least promise discretion. I told her discretion is a baseline and not a gift. Silence settled for a few seconds. I heard the faint thrum of the band through the wall like a heart behind a ribcage. In that beat, I felt the locket at my collarbone and the steadiness it had offered me in more difficult rooms than this. I told them we would return to the party now. We would smile when it was our turn to be photographed. We would clap for speeches and let the night end as gracefully as it could. And next week, during daylight, we would schedule any conversation that still needed to exist. In an office, with notes, with time limits. Claire drew a breath and let it out like someone setting down a heavy vase. She said she wanted what was best for both her children. Richard nodded the tight nod of a man who understands a door is not opening and decides not to rattle it. Daniel stepped back half a pace and held his gaze steady, which was more than he had managed earlier. He said he understood that work would go through channels. I said that was correct. We opened the door together. Music reached for us and the bright chatter of a wedding folded over the quiet we were leaving. Claire smoothed her dress. Richard fixed his tie. Daniel straightened his jacket and looked toward the dance floor as if he had a place waiting. I let them step through first, and I followed carrying the same calm I had brought in. The night outside the room was unchanged, and that was exactly as it should be. The ballroom tried to knit itself back together with a favorite waltz, but the seams still showed. I stepped in beside the flow and let the music pass around me like water around a pylon. Harrison drifted by with the courtesy of a man who understands timing. With a slight nod and a quiet smile, he signaled that the evening had given all it could and that morning would do the rest. I returned the look. There was nothing more for either of us to add inside a room already full. I found Aunt Margaret near the palms where we had stood before. She reached for my hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. No speech. Only the kind of pressure that reminds a person of her spine. I thanked her with a look, and she answered with one of her own. It said, "Be steady and go home." I turned toward the nearest table and offered a few soft nods to guests who met my eyes with kindness. A woman in emerald satin lifted her glass a fraction. A pair of older men made space for me to pass as if they understood the value of a clean exit. Across the room, Daniel had come down hard into a chair near the head table. The pose did not belong to a groom. His shoulders slumped as if a string had been cut. Color had not returned to his face. A friend tried to start an easy conversation and gave up after 2 sentences. Jessica stood a few feet away with her back angled toward him and then angled farther, drawing an invisible line that did not invite him to cross. Her bouquet hung low at her side, and the ribbon had twisted on itself. Claire kept a smile in place and spoke to a cluster of relatives about the cake, as if sweetness could repair a night. Richard returned a bottle to the bar and thanked the bartender with producer energy, busy hands and eye that refused the facts on the floor. I let my gaze pass over them without catching. They were doing what they knew how to do. I had done what I needed to do. Near the dance floor, I paused long enough to take in the room one more time. Chandeliers hummed, roses opened. The photographer lifted his camera and lowered it again when he saw that I would not pose. I touched the locket at my collarbone and felt the small circle warm against my skin. Eleanor lives in the simplest words and the oldest ones. Believe early. Keep to the line you chose when no one cheered. Let the rest be weather. A server crossed my path with a tray of coffee and offered the smallest tilt of the head. I returned it and kept moving. The maitre d' waited near the doors as if he had known where the night would end for me. He opened the way with an ease that felt like respect and not ceremony. The corridor outside the ballroom was quieter and tasted faintly of lemon and polish. I walked its length without hurry. Behind me, the song changed keys. Laughter rose and fell and then smoothed into the fabric of the evening. I passed a mirror and chose not to check my face. What mattered was inside the muscles and bones. At the elevator bank, a bellman rolled a cart past with the soft discipline of someone who has watched countless nights resolve themselves. He nodded. I took the stairs. The lobby at the Waldorf Astoria held its own kind of hush. A pair of tourists studied a city map. A concierge spoke softly into a handset. A doorman checked the street and then checked it again. I crossed the marble and felt the cool through the soles of my shoes. The revolving door gave me back the city in measured degrees. New York met me with a clean night. Air crisp enough to clear the throat. Taxi lights blinked in patient rows. Steam lifted from a grate and turned thin under the street lamps. Somewhere a siren tested its voice and then grew quiet. I stood for a moment under the awning and let the cool settle over the heat of the evening. The world did not know my name and did not need to. It simply reached its weathered hand toward morning. A car eased to the curb for another guest and then slid away. I chose to walk. The first block let me breathe with an easy count. Park Avenue moved like a river under a clear sky. My phone rested silent in the clutch. The meeting was set. The work would begin where it belongs, at a table with walls and minutes and chairs. Here in the night, there was only sidewalk and air and the tap of my heels finding their rhythm again. I turned at the corner and looked back once at the hotel canopy, a soft green square against the dark. The ballroom windows threw gold onto the glass, and then took it back. I touched the locket one more time and let my hand fall. No more words were needed. Not for them, not for me. I kept walking, the city steady at my shoulder. By the third week, the city had lost the last of its summer heat, and the glass of our tower carried a pale morning. I rode the elevator to 12 and stepped into the conference room with the long table and the clean scent of fresh paper. David Carter was already there with 2 associates' laptops, open pens lined up like silver birds. We signed the non-disclosure first initials on each page, signatures stacked where they belonged. Emma slid the copies into a folder, and the room breathed easier. We reviewed the calendar that would carry us through the end of the year. The letter of intent would be finalized before the close of 2024. Regulatory filings would be submitted as soon as the last appendix cleared, and the target for closing would sit at early 2025, if approvals moved with ordinary speed. Harrison joined the video for 10 minutes, his voice, even his camera, steady. He kept to structure and thanked the teams on both sides for their discipline. When he signed off, David walked us through the data room map like a calm street guide. Sections for finance and contracts sections, for compliance and operations audit links, nested where they should be. He noted that an independent firm had been engaged already to review revenue recognition and inventory. I felt a familiar steadiness take hold. Good work is quiet work. It keeps a pulse without needing attention. By the next week, Sterling's people had started correcting their reports. The first cleaned statements arrived in the portal, and we set our analysts to them. Questions went out. Answers came back at decent speed. Some things were sharp enough to keep, and some were not. That is the nature of any old ledger finally seen in clear light. Harrison's team cooperated with the auditors and made room for them at their desks. It is never easy for a company to be opened like that. The ones who accept it are the ones that can be saved. Daniel received his notice of a 90-day plan under new oversight. The letter was professional and specific. Weekly targets, client retention thresholds, a cap on discretionary spend, a requirement to mentor 2 junior staffers and document it. He would report to a director who did not owe him anything and who was known for straight lines. He read the letter at his desk and then at home and then again. He did not call me. He did not try to go around the process. For once he stood inside the lines that everyone else stands inside and let the rules hold. Claire and Richard fell quiet. A short handwritten note arrived by regular mail in my office, not scented, not dramatic. It said that they were thinking. It said that time has a way of showing a person where they have stood. It did not ask for anything. When we met once in the waiting area down the hall, my mother held her clutch like a small shield and asked how I was sleeping. My father looked at the floor and then asked if the view from my office made the work feel lighter. I told them I slept fine and that the view helped me remember perspective. We sat together for 12 minutes and used those minutes to be careful. It was enough. Jessica and Daniel went to counseling. I know because Jessica sent a single line through Emma, polite and sparse, that she would not be attending a holiday event we had all been invited to, and that she wanted me to know they were working on things. There was no blame hung on the sentence. Marriage is a private door. What lives behind it is not mine to narrate. In early December, we closed the loop on the letter of intent. David sent the final red line with a note that sounded like relief wearing a suit. Harrison called to say that the board on his side had signed the resolution. Our filings moved as planned. The holidays approached, and the office filled with the small gestures that mark an ending year. Pine in the lobby. Wrapped boxes lined on a shelf for a charity drive. I worked my lists and slept without the old tug at 2 a.m. On a Tuesday, I found Daniel in our lobby, not at my door, as if he had learned at last how to wait in the right place. He asked Emma if he could have 5 minutes, and she asked if I wanted to grant them. I did. He came in and sat on the edge of the chair as if it might tip. He said the plan was hard and that he was learning more than he expected. He said he had never been measured in a way that felt clean. He did not apologize, and I did not invite it. We spoke like 2 adults who had finally come to understand that truth can live in a room if no one tries to wrap it in place. By the second week of January, the auditors reported solid progress. The worst of the mess was not hidden anymore. The best of the people at Sterling took to the new frame as if they had been waiting for it. That is how order looks when it starts to take root. It is not loud. It is a room that can be trusted again. I stood at the window after the last meeting of the day and watched the city pull itself toward evening. Cabs made their small stars on the avenue. The river held a sheet of late light. In the glass, I could see the plain outline of a woman who had learned how to live inside her own boundaries. The wedding had not been a victory, It had been a moment when the cover slipped and the page underneath finally showed through. People called it a reveal. For me, it was simply a correction. The locket warmed under my hand. I thought of Eleanor and the way she defined success without ever using the word. Keep your promises to yourself. Choose your line and keep it. The rest will sort itself in time. I let the office go quiet around me, and the city carries its own music. Then I ask you one thing. What would you choose if the day you were belittled turned out to be the day the truth took your side and stayed there with you?
Enjoy your new home. My mother-in-law's voice dripped with satisfaction through my hospital room phone. I changed all the locks while you were getting your precious surgery. Amanda deserves this house more than you ever did. I lay in my hospital bed, still groggy from the anesthesia. But my mind was surprisingly clear. 6 hours of spinal surgery, and this is what I wake up to. My mother-in-law giving my house to my sister-in-law. Are you even listening? She demanded. We're having a little housewarming party right now. Everyone agrees Amanda should have it. After all, she's actually family. In the background, I could hear laughter, glasses clinking, and my sister-in-law Amanda's distinctive voice saying something about redecorating the master bedroom. My master bedroom. Thank you for letting me know, Patricia, I said calmly. The lack of reaction in my voice clearly threw her off. That's all you have to say, she sputtered. For now, enjoy the party. I hung up and closed my eyes, letting a small smile play across my lips. Patricia had no idea she just walked right into my trap. My name is Elizabeth Cooper, and at 34, I've spent the last 3 years watching my mother-in-law Patricia systematically try to push me out of the family. When my husband Michael died in a car accident 2 years ago, she became convinced that I had no right to keep the house he and I had shared. The fact that I'd helped pay for it, renovated it, and turned it into a home meant nothing to her. Family property should stay in the family, she'd say at every opportunity, staring pointedly at me. By family, she meant her precious daughter Amanda, my sister-in-law, who'd never worked a day in her life but somehow deserved everything more than I did. The worse my back problems got, a deteriorating disc condition that finally required surgery, the more Patricia circled like a vulture. She'd bring Amanda to family dinners, have her help with my housework when the pain was too bad, all while making it clear that Amanda could handle the house better. But Patricia made one crucial mistake. She thought my quiet acceptance of her behavior meant I was weak. She had no idea that every snide comment, every manipulative move, every attempt to push me out had been carefully documented, photographed, and filed away. I reached for my phone again, this time calling my lawyer David. They did exactly what we expected, I said when he answered. Patricia changed the locks and moved Amanda in while I was in surgery. They're having a party right now. Perfect, David replied, and I could hear him shuffling papers. The security cameras caught everything. Every moment, I confirmed, including Patricia using the spare key she claimed she'd lost last month. 6 months ago, when my back pain had become nearly unbearable, I'd started preparing. I knew Patricia would make her move when I was at my most vulnerable, so I'd installed security cameras throughout the house, documenting every conversation, every threat, every time Patricia brought prospective buyers by when she thought I was at physical therapy. What about the property transfer documents? David asked. Still locked in my office safe. The ones Patricia thinks she found in my desk drawer are very convincing copies. I smiled, remembering how I'd left them there as bait, watching through the cameras as she discovered them 2 weeks ago. The documents suggested that Michael had left the house jointly to Amanda and me, something Patricia had been desperately trying to prove since his death. She'd been so excited by her discovery that she never bothered to verify their authenticity. Your mother-in-law is in for quite a surprise, David said. The real documents, plus the footage of her breaking in and attempting to transfer property under false pretenses. She's going to regret this little housewarming party. I heard more laughter floating through the phone from the party happening in my house. Patricia's voice carried clearly. Finally, the house is back with its rightful owner. No more putting up with that gold-digging widow. Let them celebrate, I said quietly. Everything is falling into place exactly as we planned. Rest up and focus on your recovery, David advised. I'll file everything first thing Monday morning. Do you want me to send the cease and desist letter to the house or Patricia's address? The house, I decided. I want Amanda to see it too. They should both understand exactly what they walked into. After hanging up, I adjusted my hospital bed and looked out the window at the setting sun. 2 years of watching, waiting, and documenting every move Patricia made. 2 years of playing the grieving, passive widow while she plotted to take everything Michael and I had built together. The nurse came in to check my vitals, frowning at my elevated heart rate. "Try to stay calm," she advised. "You need to rest after major surgery." If only she knew that my racing pulse had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with anticipation. Patricia thought she was finally getting her victory, giving my home to her daughter, while I was too weak to fight back. Little did she know, every decoration they hung, every celebration drink they poured, every moment they spent plotting in my house was being recorded, documented, and added to the already substantial case against them. I picked up my phone one last time, looking at the security camera feed from my house. Patricia and Amanda were in my living room, already measuring for new curtains. The party guests, mostly Patricia's friends, were wandering through my home like they owned it, probably all congratulating themselves on finally getting rid of me. "Enjoy it while you can," I whispered, turning off the feed. "You have no idea what's coming. Let them have their party. Let them think they've won. On Monday morning, they'd learn exactly why you should never underestimate a quiet woman with a good lawyer and a long memory." I closed my eyes, finally allowing myself to rest. For the first time since Michael's death, I felt at peace. Patricia's time was running out, and justice was about to be served. The following Monday morning, I was still in the hospital focusing on my recovery when David's text arrived. Papers delivered, waiting for the fireworks. Right on cue, my phone rang. Patricia's name flashed on the screen, but this time her voice wasn't smug. It was shrill with panic. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. These papers the lawyer just delivered. This has to be a joke." I adjusted my hospital bed, making myself comfortable for what promised to be an interesting conversation. "Oh, you mean the cease and desist letter? The evidence of breaking and entering? The fraudulent attempt to transfer property? No, Patricia, it's not a joke." But the documents, I found them in your desk. The house belongs to Amanda too." Her voice cracked with desperation. "Those documents?" I couldn't help but smile. "The ones you stole from my desk when you thought I was at physical therapy? Check the letterhead carefully, Patricia. They're quite convincing copies, aren't they?" The silence on the other end was deafening. I could almost see her frantically examining the papers she found, finally noticing the subtle inconsistencies we planted. You set this up," she whispered. "I had a lot of time to think during those sleepless nights when my back pain was at its worst," I explained calmly. "Time to watch you and Amanda plotting, measuring my furniture, planning how you'd redecorate once you got rid of me. The security cameras caught everything, by the way. Every conversation, every unauthorized entry, every potential buyer you brought through my house." "Security cameras?" Her voice rose an octave. "What security cameras?" "The ones I installed 6 months ago. They're very discreet. I'm not surprised you didn't notice them. The footage is quite compelling, especially the part where you used that spare key you claimed you'd lost." Through the phone, I heard Amanda in the background, her voice panicked. "Mom, there's someone at the door with more papers." "That would be the formal eviction notice," I said. "You have 48 hours to vacate my property and return my keys. All copies of them." "You can't do this," Patricia sputtered. "We've already moved Amanda's things in. We had a party." "Yes, I know about the party. I have that on camera too, including your lovely speech about the gold-digging widow finally being gone. The judge will find that particularly interesting." The sound of papers rustling came through the phone, followed by Amanda's increasingly hysterical voice. "Mom, these papers. They're talking about criminal charges. Breaking and entering, attempted property theft, harassment. David warned me not to tell you this," I continued, "but the security footage has already been submitted to the police. They're very interested in the pattern of behavior it shows." Patricia's breathing had become shallow and rapid. "The police? But we're family." "Family?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Is that what you call it? Since Michael died, you've tried to drive me out of my own home, spread rumors about me in the community, and attempted to steal my property. That's not family, Patricia. That's criminal behavior. I'll tell everyone what you've done," she threatened, but her voice wavered. "How you set us up, trapped us." Go ahead, I replied calmly. Show them the footage. Let them watch you breaking into my house, mocking me while I was in surgery, celebrating taking advantage of someone who was physically vulnerable. I'm sure they'll be very sympathetic. Amanda's voice came through again, closer this time. Mom, we need to leave. Now, these papers say if we're not out in 48 hours, they'll press criminal charges. Listen to your daughter, Patricia, I advised. Pack your things and go. The security cameras are still running, and every minute you spend in my house is more evidence against you. This isn't over, Patricia hissed, but the fear in her voice was evident. Actually, it is. Oh, and Patricia, the rose bushes you dug up yesterday to make room for Amanda's new garden. The ones Michael and I planted on our first anniversary. Add destruction of property to the list of charges. David will be in touch with the full bill for damages. I hung up, letting out a long breath. Through my hospital room window, I could see the morning sun shining brightly. Somewhere across town, Patricia and Amanda were facing the consequences of their actions, finally understanding that their perfect plan had backfired spectacularly. My phone buzzed again. A text from my next-door neighbor. Moving trucks just pulled up. Your MIL and SIL are throwing things into boxes like the house is on fire. Whatever you did, it worked. I smiled, sending back a quick thank you. Mary had been my eyes and ears throughout this ordeal, one of the few people who'd seen through Patricia's manipulations from the start. The physical therapist arrived for my morning session, finding me in better spirits than she'd seen in months. You're glowing today, she observed. Good news. Just justice being served, I replied, ready to begin my exercises. For the first time since my surgery, the future looked bright and properly aligned, just like my healing spine. 2 weeks after my surgery, I finally returned home. The house was eerily quiet. No more sounds of Amanda's constant chatter or Patricia's critical comments about my decorating choices. The moving trucks had taken everything they brought in during their brief occupation, leaving only a few scuff marks on my hardwood floors as evidence of their attempted takeover. My neighbor Mary helped me settle back in, making sure I was comfortable as I continued my recovery. You should have seen them leave, she said, bringing me a cup of tea. Patricia was crying about how ungrateful you were, but she couldn't get out fast enough once those police cars showed up to supervise the eviction. I sat in my favorite armchair, the one Amanda had planned to throw out because it didn't match her vision, and smiled. Did they take everything they brought? Every last piece, Mary confirmed, though Patricia made quite a scene about the garden. She actually tried to dig up the new plants they put in, but the police told her to leave everything as it was. The doorbell rang and David walked in, carrying a thick folder. Good to see you up and about, he said, settling into the chair opposite me. I have updates. How bad is it for them? I asked, though I already had a good idea. They're facing multiple charges, he replied, opening the folder. Breaking and entering, attempted property theft, harassment. The security footage was damning, especially combined with the documented history of their behavior since Michael's death. The DA is particularly interested in the pattern of taking advantage of someone with a medical condition. I nodded, thinking about all the times Patricia had used my back pain against me, positioning Amanda as the healthy alternative who could properly manage the house. There's more, David continued. Several of Patricia's friends who attended that housewarming party have come forward. Apparently, she'd been bragging about her plan to take advantage of your surgery to seize the house. They're willing to testify. And Amanda, facing lesser charges, but she's not getting off easy. Her text messages to Patricia, which we recovered, show she was a willing participant in the scheme. She's already offered to pay for the damage to your garden as part of a plea deal. I looked out at the backyard where Michael's and my rose bushes had been carelessly uprooted. It was never about the garden, I said quietly. It was about respect, about honoring Michael's memory and the life we built here. David nodded understandingly. Speaking of Michael, he said, pulling out another document, the trust he set up, the one Patricia never knew about, it's now fully accessible. You can start the renovation work you two planned whenever you're ready. Tears welled up in my eyes. Michael and I had dreamed of adding a sunroom, creating a space where we could watch the sunset together. After his death, I put those plans aside, too focused on defending our home from his family's schemes. Patricia and Amanda are prohibited from contacting you, David continued. The restraining order is in effect. They can't come within 500 feet of the property. Later that evening, after David left, I sat in the backyard watching the sunset. The space where our rose bushes had been looked empty, but I already had plans for new plants, not to replace the memories, but to create new ones. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "I'm sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry." I didn't respond. Some bridges, once burned, shouldn't be rebuilt. A week later, I received an invitation to a family gathering from Patricia's sister, Jane. Her message was clear. What Patricia and Amanda did was wrong, but you're still family to some of us. I thought about it for a long time before replying. Thank you, but my family is the one I choose now. The one that respects boundaries and honors Michael's memory. As my back healed and strength returned, I began planning the sunroom addition. The contractor started work in the spring, and by summer, I had the perfect space to watch the sunset, surrounded by new rose bushes and the memories of the life Michael and I had shared. Patricia and Amanda eventually moved to another state, their reputation in our community thoroughly destroyed. Sometimes I heard snippets about them through mutual acquaintances. Patricia's bitter complaints about her ungrateful daughter-in-law. Amanda's struggles to find work with a record. But their stories weren't mine anymore. I had reclaimed not just my house, but my peace. The security cameras stayed up, not out of fear, but as a reminder that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one you should watch out for. On what would have been Michael's and my anniversary, I sat in our new sunroom, surrounded by blooming roses and the warm glow of sunset. "You would have loved this view," I whispered to his memory, "and you would have been proud of me for fighting back." The house was quiet again, but this time it was a peaceful quiet. The kind that comes with knowing you've stood your ground and won, not just the battle for your home, but for your dignity and self-respect.